Where two helicopters have collided mid-air near Seaworld. At least 4 people are dead, 3 more are fighting for their lives.
On Monday, January 2, 2023, two groups of families and friends went aboard 2 Seaworld helicopters in Gold Coast, Queensland to enjoy a 5-minute scenic flight. It was supposed to be an unforgettable memory over the state's coastlines and beautiful turquoise waters. But they did not know that a terrible nightmare awaited them. Seaworld is one of Australia's best tourist attractions. It is a premier marine theme park with its own oceanarium and features an amazing array of animal exhibits and exciting rides. From polar bears to penguins and dolphins, this location is very popular among children of diverse ages. At the same time, the exciting attractions, such as Vortex and Leviathan, attract the attention of adult visitors looking for intense thrills. It is therefore understandable that thousands of people come to the park every day to have fun with their families and friends. And so it happened on that fateful day of January 2, 2023. Among the happy crowd were 11 people who had signed up for a 5-minute panoramic helicopter flight with the goal of creating unforgettable memories. To catch a glimpse of Queensland's beautiful turquoise waters and vast coastline, which attracts people from all over the world, the group boarded 2 Seaworld helicopters. Seaworld Helicopters operates independently from the park and provides various helicopter services, including tours of the Gold Coast and its vicinity, charter services, and transfers between their terminals on the Gold Coast and destinations like Brisbane and the Northern Rivers region in New South Wales. On January 2nd, Seaworld Helicopters conducted their tourist sightseeing flights as usual. They used 2 helicopters, Eurocopters EC-130VH XH9 and VH XKQ. Both helicopters were equipped with a single turbine engine, a Finestron tail rotor, and 2 rows of seats that accommodated a pilot sitting in the front left, along with 6 passenger seats. Both helicopters had only been in service with the airline for a few weeks. The XH9 had flown only 35 hours with the airline, while the XKQ had flown only 9.5 hours. Since the sightseeing flights were all conducted on predetermined routes and with durations of 5, 10, 15, and 20 minutes, it can be concluded that the 2 helicopters had already flown many times and were therefore reliably in service. The 2 helicopters operated from 2 helipads located about 220 meters apart. Helipad 3 was located at the operator's helipad, while the other helipad was in the theme park. Both helicopters flew continuously throughout the morning, with only a break for lunch before continuing their flights in the afternoon. Michael James piloted the XH9. He had extensive flying experience, held a commercial pilot license for helicopters, and was a Grade 2 flight instructor. He had a total flight time of about 3,150 hours in his logbook. At 1:46 p.m. local time, he had just completed a 10-minute round-trip flight and was in stationary position on Platform 3 waiting for the next group of passengers to board. Edward and Marl Swart came from Auckland, New Zealand. They were visiting Queensland with their friends Rian and Elmarie Steenberg. During their stay, all 4 friends decided to participate in a scenic helicopter ride. They boarded pilot James' helicopter, accompanied by a West Australian man who was also participating in the same sightseeing tour as the friends. Once all passengers were boarded, helicopter XH9 directly departed from Pad 3 around 1:51 p.m. This time, the flight was scheduled for only 5 minutes. Although it was the shortest tour package offered, it still provided enough time to admire and appreciate the vast beauty of Seaworld and Broadwater. While the tourists marveled at the blue sky above them and the jewel-like aquamarine waters below, James focused on the route. The 5-minute flight would begin at an area known locally as Seaworld Grass before flying north at 500 feet along the coastal waters. At 1:53 p.m., 2 minutes into their flight, they reached an area called Porpoise Point, where James made a radio call stating their position, altitude, and their intention to make a left turn to fly through the Broadwater to Seaworld. While this was happening, another 5-minute panoramic flight was arranged at the second helicopter pad at Seaworld's theme park. 2 ground crews assisted the passengers aboard the XKQ. Like James, the pilot of the XKQ was also very experienced. With a total flight time of about 6,200 hours in his logbook, the 40-year-old Ashley Jenkinson held an air transport pilot license for helicopters and was a Grade 1 flight instructor. He was also the airline's chief pilot. the head of airworthiness and maintenance control, and held leadership roles within the organization. Like James, Jenkinson had just finished a 10-minute flight, but there was no rest for him either. His next passengers were already there, ready to go. Winnie Da Silva, 33, and her 9-year-old son Leon were extremely excited about the flight. Winnie, a migrant from Kenya, had moved to Geelong south of Melbourne. She had recently received a visa for her son, so the family traveled from Victoria to the Gold Coast to celebrate their reunion. They were on a tight budget, but Leon wanted to see the dolphins at Seaworld from the skies, so the family booked the flight for about $70. At about 1:53 p.m., Neil Da Silva waved off his wife and stepson, wishing them a good time on their joyride. The Silvas were joined by British couple Ronald and Diane Hughes, ages 65 and 57. This couple had only married a few months before this adventure. Also on board were a mother and son, Vanessa Tadras, 36, and her 10-year-old son Nicholas from Sydney. While they were boarding, passengers and the pilot of XH9 could see them from afar. At that point, the XH9 was already on its way back. They were flying through Broadwater and James had a clear view of Seaworld's helicopters. Given the timing, James estimated that they would be clear of the XKQ and that it would pass behind them. On the ground, the crew continued to assist Jenkinson's passengers, fastening their seatbelts and helping them with their headsets. They completed the final visual inspection of the helicopter, checked that all the doors were locked, and made sure the area behind the helicopter and on adjacent helipads were free of hazards. They saw no other aircraft, including XH9, and signaled to Jenkinson that XKQ was ready to depart. At exactly 1:55 and 42 seconds, XKQ started their panoramic flight. The helicopter began to climb over the water toward the sandbar near the helipad. During this time, Jenkinson may or may not have made a call to announce his intention to take off, but either way, James was unable to hear it. XH9 had just made a left turn toward the final approach route to helipad 3, so James' focus was on landing and managing the downward rotor movement to prevent a pleasure craft from crossing their approach route. James had no vision of XKQ, but 2 of his passengers sighted the ascending helicopter. They can see it approaching, so one of the passengers attempted to give James a verbal guidance. It didn't work. XKQ was only getting closer and closer. Fearing a collision, the other passenger physically alerted James. But by then, it was too late. At 1:56:05 p.m., 23 seconds into XKQ's flight and at a height of about 130 feet in the air, the 2 helicopters collided. It happened in the blink of an eye. Families of the passengers and many spectators could only watch in horror as the tragedy unfolded before their eyes. The screeching sound of crushing metal was loud and deafening. The main rotor blades of XKQ entered the forward cabin of XH9, smashing the windshields and destroying the instrument consoles. The impact turned XH9 to the left, making them spiral violently mid-air. James was injured and bleeding, but he reacted quickly. Following the momentum of the movement, he maneuvered the helicopter to complete a 270-degree descending turn before landing safely on the sandbank. James and 2 of his passengers were seriously injured, while the other 3 had minor injuries. They were the most fortunate survivors. The XKQ was hit hard and broke apart in midair. After the collision, the helicopter's rotor system, engine, and tail rotor systems separated from the airframe and fell to the ground one by one. Jenkinson had no chance to save himself and his passengers before what remained of the helicopter crashed straight down into the shallow water next to the sandbank. At the point of impact, the helicopter rolled about 70 degrees to the right and then rolled to the left after the impact before coming to a stop on its roof. By that point, the XKQ was more than battered. It was destroyed. Jenkins and 3 passengers were fatally injured, while the other 3 were seriously injured. People who witnessed the crash, along with Seaworld staff, rushed to the sandbank in a desperate attempt to rescue the passengers. It did not take long for emergency services to arrive as well. The passengers were examined at the scene by Queensland ambulance services and received first aid before being rushed to Gold Coast University Hospital. One of the patients was the 9-year-old Leon Da Silva. He had serious head injuries and was in critical condition. He was airlifted to Queensland Children's Hospital. Leon's mother, Winnie, had 2 broken legs and a broken shoulder and collarbone. Another critical patient was the 10-year-old Nicholas. He had to fight for his life in the hospital, while his mother, Vanessa Tadris, sadly perished due to the severity of her injuries. She was not the only one whose life was cruelly ended that day. British couple Ron and Diane and Chief Pilot Jenkinson did not escape the tragedy either. The fatalities and critically injured were all from the same helicopter, the XKQ. Those aboard the XH-9 survived the ordeal without life-threatening injuries, but their trauma is likely to remain for the rest of their lives. The Australian Safety Transport Bureau, or ASTB, led by Chief Commissioner Angus Mitchell, launched an investigation to figure out how and why the collision happened. But there were difficulties from the onset of the investigation. The time to gather perishable evidence was severely constrained due to the rising tide. At the time of the accident, at 1:55 p.m., the sandbank had been exposed, but shortly after at 5:06 p.m., a high tide of 1.05 meters partially covered the XKQ. The next high tide was 1.49 meters and was expected to come at 6 a.m. the following day. ATSB had to work overnight, but with the help of Queensland Police Service, on behalf of the coroner, they were able to recover the helicopters and transported them to a secure facility where a more detailed examination was conducted. In addition to the physical evidence at the scene, Mitchell also appealed to witnesses to come forward. He asked anyone who may have seen the collision or who witnessed the helicopters in any phase of their flights or who may have footage of any kind to contact the Bureau at the earliest opportunity. The investigation conducted by ATSB was extensive, though it was still only in its preliminary phase or the evidence collection phase. It involved not only the detailed examination of the wreckage of the helicopters and its components, but the Bureau also examined the collected photos and footage from witnesses, recordings from CCTV, and radio transmission at the time of the accident. ATSB also conducted interviews with the surviving pilot and passengers, onlookers, ground crews, maintenance personnel, and pilots and operators conducting similar helicopter operations to assist the investigation. 64 days after the crash, on March 7, 2023, the ATSB finally released its preliminary report, answering some, if not all, of the questions surrounding the accident. The report detailed how the helicopters were operating in a non-controlled airspace. The area above the helipads to a height of 1,500 feet is uncontrolled, meaning the airspace has no supervision from air traffic control, so helicopters require no clearance and have no need to report any external flight controller. However, a pilot inbound must make an inbound call about 10 nautical miles from the landing site through a Common Traffic Advisory Frequency, or CTAF, which is the communication medium used in uncontrolled airspace to warn other aircraft of their approach to the landing site. CTAF has no defined boundary, and in the Gold Coast, the same VHF frequency services two other aerodromes. One is in Southport about 9 kilometers to the northwest, and the other is Heckfield Aerodrome, about 27 kilometers north-northwest, including tourist charter, private sightseeing, flight training, military and police operations, and parachuting. The volume of aviation operations that take place in the CTAF area is large and diverse. When an inbound call is made, pilots had to trust that the relevant personnel and individuals are paying attention. The ATSB report confirmed that James, the pilot of XH-9, made 2 inbound calls, at 1:52 passing over the Seaworld grass and again at 1:53 just north of Porpoise Point. The inbound calls were recorded at Southport Aerodrome, where communications on the local CTAF were usually recorded. However, since the tower at Southport sits behind a number of tall buildings, it only picks up some of the calls at certain altitudes. At the time, 2 other helicopters from another operator, Marina Mirage, were flying in the vicinity. One of the helicopters flying over the coast and near Seaworld said he recalled hearing the inbound call from XH-9, but he didn't hear a call from XKQ. The other Marina Mirage helicopter heading southwest did not recall hearing calls from either XH-9 and XKQ in the period prior to the collision. James himself said that he didn't hear a taxi call from XKQ, but this does not necessarily mean that a call was not made. Mitchell said that they would have to undertake a more detailed analysis of the radio calls, and that the result will depend on what evidence ATSB can get. not only from recordings, but from eyewitnesses as well. Mitchell warned that there may be some things that they may not be able to completely determine. The report also detailed that the pilot of XH-9 was not able to actually see the other helicopter depart from its helipad, though the video footage taken by the passengers on both helicopters on mobile phones did contain images of the other helicopter, and in fact, 2 of XH-9's passengers attempted to warn its pilot of XKQ's approach. This does not necessarily mean the other helicopter was visible to both pilots. Further investigation will be conducted into the problem both pilots may have encountered in seeing the other helicopter. ATSB further reported on the helicopter's transponders, which under ideal circumstances would have been able to warn the pilots of the potential collision. However, Seaworld helicopters were not required to have an airborne collision avoidance system, which is a transponder-based air-to-air traffic monitoring and alerting system, but XH-9 and XKQ were both still fitted with a basic traffic collision avoidance system, which is a type of ACAS. But the pilots at Seaworld reported that the system was not fully integrated with XH-9 and XKQ, and that it was only providing auditory alerts but no visual cues and guidance. The surviving pilot reported that he did not hear an alarm from the transponder before the collision. Based on ATSB's investigation, the transponder on XH-9 was in fact not working properly on the day of the accident. While the transponder of the departing XKQ was correctly transmitting the aircraft's position and altitude, the returning XH-9's transponder was not transmitting secondary surveillance radar responses that were detected by radar surveillance equipment for the accident flight or previous flights. The operator reported that they were aware the transponder was faulty, but because the helicopters were operating outside the controlled airspace, the transponder was not required to be airworthy. Mitchell said that there are different requirements when going into controlled airspace, and the functionality of particularly systems like TCAS that were onboard helicopters are yet to be determined. In the course of the investigation, ATSB will be looking further into the full functionality of TCAS and how they were being used. Further investigation into Seaworld Helicopters' policies and procedures and possible regulatory oversight was also conducted. Seaworld Helicopter reported that it intended to address elements of aircraft visibility and aids to traffic detention, including high visibility paint on rotor blades, additional strobe lighting on helicopters, introduction of helipad controllers who can provide traffic advice to pilots, and the use of live radar data displayed on an iPad in the cockpit. Finally, Mitchell said that the preliminary report only detailed the facts that the ATSB had established in the first 2 months of its investigation. It's important to highlight that they are yet to make findings, and no safety issues that may need to be addressed to lessen the likelihood of a reoccurrence in the future has been determined. The results of the preliminary investigation may have been disappointing to the survivors, who are still doing their best to recover their mental and physical health. It's especially dismaying for the families who have lost their loved ones, who wanted to understand how and why the tragedy unfolded, and why didn't the safety equipment, processes, and procedures that are designed to prevent such accidents work on this occasion. But Mitchell assured that ATSB's purpose in their ongoing investigation is to uncover any safety issues that contributed or potentially contributed to the accident, and to encourage safety recommendations and safety actions so that similar accidents can be avoided in the future. ATSB will continue to look at everything that may have contributed, whether that be equipment, whether that be procedures, whether that be individual actions. The full ATSB report into the collision is expected to be released in September 2024 at the earliest. Thanks for watching this story. Don't forget to like and subscribe and turn on your notification bell to stay updated on more similar videos. We would love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share your comments below. Until next time.